Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by social worker David Szczecinski. David served in the Army, but in 2003, he retrained as a social worker. He started out working in the prisons as a drug and alcohol counselor, but now what he does is he gives coaching and therapeutic services to those in the screen industry. So we're going to be talking to him about what that means and having him talk about his journey as a social worker. So David, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Curtis. It's great to be here.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself? And by the way, David is from Australia, but just start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm a 56-year-old, married, about 26 years to my partner. I have 3 adult children. And I'm currently in private practice in Milan, coaching and training. And we provide a lot of different services to all sorts of industries and individuals, all the way from therapeutic mental health services, all the way through to our on-set therapist, where we work with people in any of the entertainment industries to manage and understand mental health, as well as I'm a critical incident responder. And in the coaching realm, I am a connection coach, and I work with people who have significant social anxiety, and I help them connect and create relationships, maintain relationships, and reframe relationships, which means that I model all of the behavioural and psychological strategies that we use, and then we help our people, our students, go through their own journey in connection. So that's pretty much what we're doing at the moment.
So talk about how you got started in coaching and social work and what made you want to do what you're doing now.
Well, I started really in my own, I guess, trauma journey in my childhood, which probably left me not very well equipped for managing relationship. And I joined the Army, and that became my parent technically, which was great for structure and discipline, although it still didn't teach me how to connect with human beings in a way, I guess, that's pleasant. Perhaps at times it was less than pleasant. Through military service, as you do, often there's alcohol associated with service. So I drank a lot of alcohol to artificially regulate how I felt, because depression is suppression after all. And I had a marriage that failed, and I left the Army due to basically knee injuries, and met my wife now, Deborah, and had to kind of start my connection journey and learning to understand people all over again. I had PTSD, so decided to live in a car with her and our young child and travel, and ended up in a place called Western Australia, which is in the middle of nowhere. I think it might be one of the remotest cities in the world. And I was probably 16 months growing vegetables, living off welfare. In Australia, we have Centrelink, which gives you a basic very, very below average subsistence wage. And she said one day to me, "Dave, you really need to get a job." And I said, "Well, okay, but I haven't got very many skills technically." And she said, well, why don't you become a social worker? And I said, no, I want to be a school teacher. She said, oh, Dave, you don't really like kids that much. And I said, yeah, you're probably right. What about a psychologist? And she goes, well, Jesus has a psych background. And she said, well, too many rats and stats and statistics and paperwork. Become a social worker. So I went to uni and became a social worker. And again, you start at the bottom of a tree somewhere, which I did, very raw. Uni doesn't necessarily teach you how to do your job. It's quite broad. So it's a 4-year degree, really about how human beings operate in systems. And so I started working in prison, actually, before I got out of the degree, as a drug and alcohol counsellor. And then I went from there to mental health services, which was very interesting because, again, it was thrown in at the deep end. I rocked up to the job one day with my mate Barry, and I'd been interviewed over the phone, and the phone reception was terrible. And literally the mental health service was remote, so about 800 kilometres from Perth City, in a place called Kalgoorlie, mining town, and quite technically rough. And I got there and they said, oh, you've got a caseload of 15. And I'm saying, well, I actually don't really know much about how to treat. They go, oh, you'll learn on the job. It's sink or swim here. So it's like, okay, this is going to be fun. And I had an old Scottish nurse take me under her wing and said, David, I'll teach you everything you need to know about mental health, the nursing side of things, not the social work side of things, because we're all clinicians in mental health services. We all have the same title, basically do the same thing. And so I spent, a good 7 years moving in mental health, rural, regional, becoming a senior social worker, clinical, which means just mental health social worker. And I also did child and adolescent. I worked a lot with youth. And then I went into private practice. That was another bottom of the rung experience because now I had to really put my money or my treatment where my mouth was and provide very effective treatments, which I decided to develop a thing called the self-awareness method, which was to really understand the human being at the deepest possible level, to deconstruct us down to our basic systems and then reconstruct. And from there, I started to work with all sorts of mostly what we would call nowadays identity issues. It's mental health issues like depression, anxiety, things like that. They do have a root way before we were born. And by the time we're, 3 years old, we're pretty well installed with information from generations ago, genetic information. We're installed with how our significant others feel and think, because we don't technically have an assessing mind. We absorb everything. And then we make that our original identity. And from that original identity, we start to develop who we are as a human being, who we are as a person. And I use a lot of computer language because it just kind of helps to understand this human installation. And from there, we literally encode a whole bunch of sensory data that tells us, what our environment's like. We start to individuate. As an adolescent, start to neural prune, as Dr. Daniel Siegel says. And then we finally, about 25 to 28, we're developing our adult identity. And so these issues that we might call them issues or challenges are really got to do with how we've encoded this data and how we understand our sense of self and how we understand that in relation to the world. Then if you add a partner in there, because partnership choices are encoded between the ages of 5 to 8, then literally we have these two human beings trying to connect with one another. But often they're on the same page because language creates meaning. And we do construct our realities based on really how we feel and what's been pre-installed, which I call an old map. And that old map becomes a default setting. So I've been working, picking my way through this process for about 15 years. And now I'm working, as you said, Curtis, developing a business to work with the movie and entertainment industry that assists with that, working on mind sites to assist people to make sense of how they're experiencing the world, and doing a lot of work with individuals who want to create new relationships, although they may not have had the best modeling, best encoding. They may be defaulting to old experiences and habits of thought and feeling, and they want to change that. One of the questions I often get asked is, David, why do I go out with the same person with a different face? And I'm going to say, well, that's a pre-installation. And in a way, I work with the behavioural patterns. I work with how we have these patterns of behaviour, thought and feeling that continue to cycle until something changes, until we correct something. So in the neuroscience, when a strategy fails, there's technically a thing called an error code in the brain, which says, hey, that didn't work. Take away the dopamine from those cells and give you a feeling that's not flash to tell you to try another strategy. Well, when we're little, we've only got 3 strategies. We've got connect, which is a deep wiring thing. We're hardwired for connection. We've got make more noise, so I'm now in distress, or we've got a dissociation or a shutdown to recoup our energy and to then make another attempt. A lot of my clients, students, patients, whatever we want to call them, have very, very unhappy, very difficult early days where they continually have these codes activated, because the mind is a wonderful predicting machine. And once something happens once or twice, we start to predict that it's going to happen again. So therefore, patterns of thought and feeling and behavior are formulated out of these early ways we make sense of the world. And literally a correction code is where we change that experience based on what's happening to us now, rather than what happened in the past. In other words, we review all the new data. And that process, we call it, or I call it, a re-encoding. That process is what tends to move us through what I might call emotional evolution. It moves us into our next level of being able to regulate, being able to have empathy, being able to have compassion, being able to have response flexibility or be flexible when that error code's saying, hey, you're back in the past, and you're in your higher functions, you're going, well, you know what? It's a different time, different date. I'm 56, different partner, different experience. It's not the same. Because when we have an error code, we delete, generalize, and distort. We actually literally filter data through how we feel. It's called emotional refraction. Dr. Paul Ekman will tell you all about that if you want to read Emotions Revealed or look online. So we're filtering through our feeling state, and we're filtering out or deleting things that don't fit with how we feel. And because we're working from a past or an old map that was pre-encoded, then anything that doesn't fit with how we feel can be technically not noticed. We just call it a deletion. It's not really deleted, but it's just not noticed. So then we're generalizing. We're going, you know what? It's all bad. Everything's bad. You never loved me. You never cared about me. We're using very generalized language. And that's when I know a person's in an old map, because they'll generalize. And finally, we're distorting. We're creating a new reality, new wiring, new connection wiring based on how we feel at the time and who we're looking at, rather than looking at possibly the differences or the changes. And in order to make those changes, taking on those differences or encoding those differences takes some drills and skills. Do your drills, get your skills, as Dr. David Schneider will tell you. And takes that being able to really have those two elements happening simultaneously and choosing the high road over possibly the emotional road that is triggered because really a feeling is how our nervous system tells us something. It doesn't work in a thought. The thought carries an emotional charge, And the intensity of that charge tells us how important that thing is. So all the nervous system says is, I want more of that. It's pleasurable, it's comfortable and predictable. That's good. If it's not pleasurable, not comfortable, unpredictable, it's bad. Therefore, if it's bad, I want less of it. If it's good, I want more of it. Dopamine for more, cortisol, all the other stuff for less. And literally, our error codes are made up of that not good, avoid that thing. And our correction codes are made up of, hey, we can actually change that thing. So human beings can make changes, and we're always evolving physically, mentally, and emotionally towards something better, a better identity, a better self. Most people have that drive. When we get stuck, that's when it gets difficult. And usually being stuck is we're repeating old code, repeating old patterns. So our primal operating system, safety, protection, and procreation, everyone's running off that. That's the bottom of the rung. After that, we're installing different experiences on top of that, different programs. And that hangs out, those different programs or habits or patterns hang out in the subconscious. And the primal operating system is in the unconscious. Then you've got the good old conscious mind, that's your basic operator. And what it does is it's designed to go, okay, I need to do something, yet my old programming is telling me something different. I need to assess that. And I need to work out, are there differences or are there similarities, and what happens from there. Unfortunately, when the old programming is running, earliest memory is strongest memory, and it can often default back to that old code or that old map because it can start to shut down or inhibit the ability to assess. So to assess, we have to have that regulation. To have that regulation, we need to look at these two maps and look at the difference and then do some practical strategies. So all of these things are happening constantly in human beings. You add two people together, they're both doing that process, deleting, distorting, generalizing, creating reality. Because really, we don't remember an event. We remember the memory of the memory of the memory of the memory of the event ad infinitum. In other words, when an event first gets encoded in sensory data, what you see, what you hear, what you taste, what you touch, what you smell, where you are in time and space, was it safe or unsafe, and how did you react to that? How was that working for you? That's recorded, but every time we think about that event, we experience something similar that activates that code, it actually gets added to it. So over time, we can be responding to something that really, if we could look at the original event, it may not even be that important. So we are literally going through life recreating and constructing these codes. And I'm basically what I call a human hacker in a way. I help people decode the system and recode the system in the way that they want to do. So that's about it for that, Curtis. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's pretty interesting, and you definitely know your stuff. And what I want to know from you is what made you decide to get into the working with the entertainment industry, and what do you see different in regards to mental health that you might not see as far as the public, because I know they face a lot more pressure than maybe some of us do.
Yeah, what got me into the entertainment industry or looking at the entertainment industry is I guess I look at the human being or the person as a package that has a bunch of information that's stored in there, and everybody's going through this journey. So what is different about the entertainment industry? Well, it's not really different, the journey people are going through, although there are certain expectations on every industry or every person that may be a little different. So entertainment industry is really interesting because when you imagine something, you're technically re-encoding it. So imagine if an actor or an actress has to play a role, and they have to play that role in such a way as it's believable on a screen. Well, what they're really doing is they're creating an identity that doesn't disappear. That identity becomes a part of them because imagination is literally encoding. And you can see this in yourself when, let's say, you have anxiety. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, you wake up in the morning, bolt upright, you've had a cortisol spike, and you go, oh my golly, I'm going to have a terrible day at work tomorrow. Now you'll get an image, you'll get a feeling. And when you're getting that image, what you're actually telling the nervous system, which is encoded from the top of the head to the soles of the feet, it's the whole system. We are a whole system. We're not just a head on a stick. Literally, this whole system is working together to help us evolve or help us move into being a better person than we started out. And in fact, we evolve past our parents. We stand on their shoulders. And then our children stand on our shoulders and we move up through that process. The entertainment industry is different because they're creating personas that aren't even their own. Although the mechanisms by which we create identity, originally it's reflected to us by others. So whatever's going on for them, we encode and it becomes part of us because when we're little, we can't individuate or separate out. So that early life identity or old map is our default setting for where we're going to go when we get overwhelmed. So a person in the entertainment industry is putting on a face. They're putting on a mask. They're being a chameleon. They're creating this persona, although they've also got another persona. And it's helping people be able to swap between personas without becoming traumatized. So let's say an actor or an actress has to do a scene that is violent. They have to play a character like a psychopath or they have to play the Joker, for example. They have to play a character that they have to imbibe those feelings, those thoughts, those body movements, because we do all the body language and all the linguistics that go with this as well. They have to take on that whole persona. Well, there's always an artifact of that persona left. And in fact, it can be very difficult for them to change those characters. I think you might notice with the recent Elvis Presley movie. Yeah, look in the media, you'll see something about that. And what happens is that persona becomes part of your identity. And sometimes if it's a traumatic persona, we might want to decode that. We might want to decode that process so that they can get on with feeling a much more healthier, much better, be able to go and visit their family, let's say, rather than having to wait a week while they change everything. They're getting decoded in a couple of hours and then they're getting on the plane and going home. So that industry, you're creating identities. That industry, the identity is often expected of you. So in certain industries, you're expected to be a certain way. Take the modeling industry, for example. There's a certain expectation. Now, if you don't meet that expectation, if you have an approval driver, there's 17 emotional drivers, which are core impressions that get installed into us that come from the work I'm doing, the self-awareness method. One of them is called an approval driver. So someone with a high approval driver is behaviorally adapting to please others. So that's the way they've survived. Everything that I do is in nature. It's in the coding that's kind of automatic. So then when they're an adult, they may still be running that driver. So let's say they're asked to do a scene they don't agree with. They might do it feeling incredibly uncomfortable, although what they're actually doing is traumatizing themselves. If you push the nervous system through something that it tells you is not good, then there will be a trauma. And that trauma will come out later on in different places. It will come out in different areas. It may not come out on set, although it may come out at home. It may come out in your marriage. It may come out with your children. And these things are accumulative because emotion is the energy and motion of the feelings. The feelings are the nervous system's way of telling you something. The emotion is accumulative. So if you imagine we're like a pressure vessel and we are that big, let's say we're this big. I don't know if you can see me. You probably can't see my hands, but they're about the size of my head right now. And down the bottom, we've got tension. Now, tension is what we need, a certain level of anxiety or stress to function. my level of tension to put my pants on in the morning might be higher than your level of tension, Curtis, but we have tension. That's normal. You've done an exam before, you get a bit of nerves doing the exam. You go to, I have a radio show, Inside Relationships, so I have a little bit of nerves before I reveal the deep, dark dive of the rabbit hole of behaviour. I might have a bit of tension going on. And then when I start, I'm okay. So that's tension. But then there's stress. Stress is when the nervous system is starting to get full. It's starting to fill up with emotion. It's starting to say, you know what, Dave, it's not too flash what you're doing. Now, if you keep adding tension and you keep adding tension, keep adding stress, so tension becomes stress, eventually you're going to get up to war footing. Now, war footing is the moment before anxiety, before actual anxiety kicks in. So if I give you an example, let's say that I'm doing connection coaching and I'm modeling to just a young lad who thinks that perhaps his thoughts might be, I'm not good enough. He might have, I'm being judged thoughts. He might be feeling that if he approaches people to talk to them, that they will reject him. So they have patterns of thinking that are probably less than pleasant, causing a lot of stress in his nervous system. So let's say we're in any establishment and he wants to go and approach someone and talk to them. The first thing that's going to happen is when I say, hey, buddy, how about you talk to that person over there? He's going to have a feeling in the body of anxiety because he's now on war footing. He's just getting, he's not having a panic attack, but he's just kind of that high tension, high stress level where he's like, my nervous system's telling me to fight or flight, mostly flight right now. And the first thing he's going to want to do, and it's classic, is he's going to want to go and artificially regulate those feelings. He's going to want to put something in his body to kill the pain. So if it's a place that serves alcohol, he will want to go to the bar and grab a drink before he talks to this person. Although as his coach, I will not let him do that. Or will I let him have any edibles or anything else before he starts his session? He has to feel it to heal it. He has to feel the level of feeling in the nervous system in order to build resilience and tolerance to that feeling so that he can move through. Because the more he feels it, the more he heals it, the more tolerance he builds. So we don't let him go for the artificial regulator. Although we don't want to give him no skills. We don't want to just say, go and talk to that person without skills. So I will model to him first that interaction, physically do it in front of him. And I will use drills and skills that I teach him to have a great conversation. And when it's his turn to have it, he'll push himself through that fear, have the conversation, even only for a minute, 1 minute. He'll come away and he would have done a correction. His error code was telling him something bad's going to happen, therefore his future mind predicts rejection. He gets to the person, he doesn't get rejected. In fact, they smile, have a great conversation about the weather or whatever. Then he gets a dopamine hit that says, you know what, you did it. So he's actually recoded because you've got to rewire to recover. So that recoding now enables him, if he continues to push himself or lean into the pain, as we call it, through the process without overwhelm and artificial regulation, he will actually become a fairly good communicator because it's freeing up real estate in his assessing mind to actually think while he's doing his process, to read the body language and do everything else. So in the entertainment industry, these guys are taught to do all of that anyway as part of their courses. And literally, they're going through and they're pushing themselves through things that maybe they don't even recognize they're doing. Now, what leads to an accumulated trauma is when we're just not aware of that process. The nervous system's doing its thing. We're in the conscious mind and we're just pushing ourselves through things that might be a bit unpleasant. If that happens enough, we can then have a breakdown. So we may become too anxious or too nervous to do something and just not be able to go to work or not connect, or we may need some drugs or alcohol to get through, or we may become depressed, which is where the nervous system's kind of in a shutdown. It's kind of going, you know what, sunshine, you're not going anywhere. We're overwhelmed and you're in shutdown. So with this industry, it's kind of geared up to pushing ourselves through levels of tolerance that are sometimes very, very high, also while creating personas that can lead to traumatic issues. So it's a very interesting industry because a lot of other industries don't have that. When a factory worker rocks up to work, they're not playing a role. They might have a couple of colleagues they don't get on with, but you know what? They can avoid them. But in an entertainment industry where there's a lot of pressure on us, there's ratings, there's YouTube, there's Instagram, there's Facebook, there's Telegram, there's all sorts of reviews. There's all sorts of people making comments that never made comments before. They'd have to do it face-to-face or by letter. All of that is impacting on us. And it's a very demanding industry whereby being able to manage that window of tolerance and psychologically and emotionally move through those processes is really useful for longevity, but also useful for producers and other industry people. For example, I do the body language, I do the facial expressions, I do the behavioral profiles. So we look at scripts, we look at things, we look at how things are constructed, the language is constructed, because some language can create meaning that's traumatizing, especially documentary work. Other language does not necessarily. So if someone does a film about mental health, which happened here recently, all in good intention, that they did a film about mental health that was traumatizing to the audience, who all came with complex trauma. So not only did the audience get re-traumatized, but also then the reviews are not that flash for the producers, even though they had good intentions, because the psychology of the trauma was probably not well understood. So there were things that could have been done in the filming or the writing that would have lessened the impact. And if you're after an impact, we'll go ahead, take the consequences. Although in an educational film, perhaps about, self-harm or suicide, then some of these images for people who have had those things happen, or family members, they have vicarious trauma, hasn't happened to them, but it's happened to someone else. And of course, that gets taken on in our nervous system, because we do tend to, in a way, when we see some image on a screen that's unpleasant, part of us goes, what if that was me? And we can actually connect on a deep level. Again, it's about avoiding that threat. So in the production side of things, it's also quite critical if we're not wanting to traumatize our audience. So that's why I got into it, because it's a fascinating industry and there's so much potential, although also this can be so much harm. And I like longevity much as the next person. So if I have workers working for me, presenting my workshops or whatever, I want them to be functional and I want them to be able to go home and sleep at night. I don't want them on alcohol or drugs to artificially regulate their nervous system just so they can cope and eventually burn out. And so there's so many factors in that industry that are really, really amazing, positive, but there's also so many challenges. And it's about meeting those challenges, and it's about making it work for as many possible people as we can. Can't please everyone, although because I work in the deep code or the deep nature, I work in the programming that we have, then we can tweak things at certain levels, either physically, mentally, emotionally, linguistically, that will have better outcomes for not only our workers, but also our audiences and our producers, our production managers, our sound people, because the sound people can get traumatized on the set. That's happened, you know. So that's why, Curtis. What's your thoughts about that, mate?
I think that's pretty interesting, and I'm definitely glad that there are people out there like you that do what you do, and I'm sure the entertainers are glad as well. We got about 15 more minutes, so what I want to ask now is, do you have any current or upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to know about?
At the moment, I'm writing my book. That's probably my biggest project, and we're providing workshops either online or in person around personal and professional empowerment and relationship self-defense. So these are emotional self-defense. So helping people manage difficult behavior in a way where they don't have to technically leave a relationship, although they can manage it and work through some of the old issues they might have, but at the same time manage the people in the relationship in the way that creates safety for them and for others. Those workshops are something that we are currently providing, and they are quite important because often I remember someone saying to me, a client saying to me, "Oh, my last therapist said I had to leave my partner in order to get better." And my mouth kind of fell open, and I was, okay, all right, how come? And they told me, and I said, "Well, you know what? What if we can help you manage things in a certain way that can leave you regulated, empowered, not disempowering other, but moving things towards possibly a way you might want the relationship to go, and also could be good for the other person." And they said, "Great, let's do that." So we've done that. And so these workshops or these projects that we are working on are specifically for that. The second project that we have going on is my book. It is called The Secret Life, The Human Installation. And it's about pretty much all I've talked about, but there's so much more. And it's a story-based book, so it's non-fiction fiction. So all of the characters are going through all of these processes that I talk about. So it's an entertaining story, and it's about their behavioral journey, their emotional, cognitive, and physical evolution. And it's based on over many years, my 15 to 20 years in this field. It's based on many of my clients, but all kind of rolled into each character. And so when you read each character's journey and their interactions, you'll be able to get tips and tricks to change things, although it's in a story-based way. So the education comes through the story. I have these iron rules where I put the information in, or what has to be done. And then we have the narrator, which will be me narrating certain things about what's going to happen. And each character will go through their process, their dialogue, and their experiences. And it's a little bit of a mystery book as well. So it covers a part of our very early development in the way that we choose our partners, how we find that we get attracted to one another, how that deep code actually operates underneath our conscious mind and draws us to the person we're going to learn the learning lessons of from our early life, although that's not our plan. Have you ever found yourself saying, "I don't want to be like my dad or my mum," and then you hit 25 and suddenly you go, "Oh my God, I'm my dad"? And it's about, and that's that early code's way of trying to evolve us through what they had difficulty with, help us learn to not have difficulty with that, and then help our children evolve past that. So it's all about that deep code and how to rewire that deep code, but in a story sense. So that's the main thing. And we're always looking out for producers and actors, actresses, models who want to go through these processes with us about re-encoding and working on the traumas and working on managing how they're feeling and thinking and making changes to their empowerment if they require to do so. So that's really where we're working at the moment, Curtis, and it's all on our website. We can be contacted on mymilan.com.au, mymilan, like Milan the city, and everything should be or is on the website. My lovely Deb puts that up, and she does all the administration, all that work. And we can always be contacted. You can look me up, David Milan or David Szczecinski, and you can find us and contact us. I think if you look up David Szczecinski, I'm number one on Google because I'm David Szczecinski. So we're very available to have a bit of a chat. about what your needs are. What do you think, Curtis, about that?
Oh, I think that's pretty cool. I think the listeners should definitely check you out. And, like you say, if there's any actors and producers out there, they should get in touch with you. And I think that, this is a great episode for people to learn about mental health, and especially mental health in the entertainment industry and all that you do, David. And I think that, listeners should follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. Give me some feedback on the show at cjackson102@cox.net. Let me know how you like the topics, any kind of special topics or guests that you want me to try to get on. And David, I'd like to take this time to thank you for joining me and showing the listeners and gracing them with your presence and expertise.
Thank you very much. And one takeaway that I would leave people with, and there's always a takeaway, is that, look, behaviour can be changed, thoughts can be changed, feelings can be changed. They are all states. And they are states that often we had no real control over when we were little. Although as we get older and bigger and we learn to assess, we can make some significant changes. And so pretty much everything, I can't say everything because that's quite general, but most things can be changed, can be tweaked, can be made better. And that gives us a lot of hope for the future. We're not necessarily stuck in our nature. We can evolve past that. And thank you very much, Curtis, for having me on the show. It was a wonderful experience.
I appreciate you. For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.